Rebbe would often, when people would write about issues having children or all sorts of issues, the Rebbe would encourage people to strengthen their observance of family purity, and that the Rebbe stressed that is really the receptacle for blessings in the family, for healthy, happy, holy children. The way a couple conducts themselves in terms of family purity and going to the mikveh in the proper way, etc., really sets the tone for the family. And so it's a very special mitzvah. It's a very important mitzvah. And I think, Rabbi Solich, I saw in the email, he put that we're going to be talking about how a mikveh is more important than a Torah scroll. Now, I didn't get a heads up about that particular detail. So I didn't actually see that in my preparing for this class. I didn't actually see that point. But what I would think that where that comes from is that a Torah scroll is, what's Torah? Torah is knowledge. Torah is the way to live a godly life. But what's more important, the Torah or the Jewish people? The answer is the Jewish people. The Torah is just a way for the Jewish people to connect to Hashem through the Torah. And so a mikveh is what enables the couple to live a holy life according to the Torah and have children through that. And so really the mikveh is what leads to the Jewish family, which then is able to keep the Torah. So if you have to look between a mikveh and a Torah, the mikveh is what is more important. But what we're going to get into tonight is some of the details of how a mikveh is made, some of the intricacies of a mikveh, because a mikveh can be a very costly project. It's very complicated. I actually sat in on a meeting, the Chabad Israeli Center, which is right near Dunwoody. So I go there all the time. I have a good relationship with Rabbi Garari, so he's building a mikveh. So he brought a rabbi from New York because there's nobody here in Atlanta who's certified that way. So he brought a rabbi from New York to basically go over the plans and make sure the architect who's not Jewish understands what has to be done. And so I literally sat through this class where he's explaining to this non-Jewish person how a mikveh has to work. And it's intricate, it's complicated, things have to be done in a very specific way, as we'll see soon, some of these details. So it's really quite fascinating. And once you understand it, you see really what goes into making a mikveh and how complicated it really is. So before we get into how a mikveh is built, let's just discuss just generally, who needs to go to a mikveh? When is a mikveh required? So in ancient times,
today or
right. So if you look at the Torah, in ancient times, a mikveh was needed for all sorts of different situations. For a person who maybe had tsaras and leprosy, and he has to, get over that state of impurity to become pure again, he would go to the mikveh. A person who was a zav, a man who experienced an emission, would go to the mikveh in order for him to become pure and be able to deal with holy things, eat from the sacrifices, etc. Today, really, a mikveh is needed for two main functions. Well, let's say three. One is for women. So in their monthly cycle, after their period, then at the end of that counting of the days, they'll go to mikveh, and that's on a biblical level that's required. Then a convert who's converting to Judaism will go to a mikveh, and then there's a separate law which has nothing to do with people, but rather what we call kalim, tefillas kalim, which is that vessels or utensils or whatever, certain utensils, not all, have to be immersed in a mikveh before they're used. And that's not just a minhag, it's not just a nice thing, it's actually a biblical commandment to tovel our kalim, our utensils before they're used. So really something to keep in mind if you're not being, if you weren't aware of that until now, definitely something to keep in mind for the future. To you buy a new metal pot or whatever it is, dunk it in the mikveh.
Specific reason for that?
So the idea is that there is, the keli is coming from the possession of a non-Jew to the possession of a Jew, and therefore it goes through a purification process. Why it only applies to certain type of vessels and not others, that's not clear. It's not clear why that is the case. So generally, we have this idea that it's just like a convert who goes from being not Jewish to Jewish, goes through a purification process. So through the vessels that we have go through this purification process. But not all of it is explained, why only applies in certain situations, or not.
But you know the manufacturer is in Israel,
Yeah.
Jewish, still has to do it.
No, then you don't have to.
So I know, the plates, whatever it is, so if you know that the manufacturer was a Jew, you don't have to.
Correct.
Correct.
Also, anything wooden doesn't need to go in a mikveh. Glass does. Yeah.
Plastic does not.
Plastic's not. So it's mainly glass and metal. Yeah. Yeah. Those are the main categories. So no, ceramics actually, the only reason why we do tovel ceramics, we don't tovel them with a bracha. We don't make a bracha when we tovel them. The reason why we do tovel them nevertheless is because they have a glass finish. So it's like shiny and whatever, that's actually a glass finish. So we tovel it because of the glass finish. But because it's not the utensil itself is not really made out of glass, we actually only do that without a bracha. So you will tovel it but without a bracha. But that's just another area where you need a kosher mikvah for. Now, men's mikvahs, yeah, exactly. So we have it right here. Men's mikvahs exist and they're important, but men going to mikvah these days is much more of a later development. It's not really something from the Torah. It's something that Ezra in the Second Temple established that men should also go through some sort of purification process at different times before you go to pray, after certain, in certain situations. So let's say on Yom Kippur, so that's a minhag to go to mikvah because you're getting ready for a big day. So the mikvah that men use, the mikvah here is a proper mikvah, but technically a man doesn't need the highest level of a mikvah like women or like a convert or like vessels do, because the requirement for men to go to mikvah is not a biblical requirement. It's kind of a step down from that, and therefore the requirements are less serious. But let's get into what a mikvah needs to be. How do you make a mikvah? What are the necessary components of a mikvah in order for it to be a kosher mikvah? So number one, a mikvah cannot be a vessel. A mikvah cannot be a keli. In other words, you can't go and fill up a giant tub and go to mikvah in that. It doesn't count. A mikvah cannot be a keli. This is a very important detail that's going to run the whole gamut of this class. A mikvah cannot be a receptacle. So it has to be in the ground. It has to be built into the ground. Number one of a mikvah. Number two is a mikvah needs to have a certain amount of rainwater in order for it to be counted as a mikvah. How much rainwater? 40 sa'ah. Sa'ah is a certain measurement in the Halachah.
Does it have to be rainwater or just to be river water as well? Could it not?
No, so let's start from the bottom and then we'll work up to where you're getting. Rainwater. It has to be rainwater, 40 sa'ah. How much is that? So it needs to be basically 24 cubic feet. That's the amount of space that needs to be there in order for the mikveh to be kosher.
That's the amount of rainwater, the amount of space in the mikveh.
So it's both. Meaning to say the mikveh could have giant walls, but the amount of water that needs to be there, exactly, it's about 100 gallons of water, of rainwater. No, not that much at all. Now, of course, that doesn't necessarily mean that a person would be able to go to mikveh, because it could be that a person wouldn't be able to fit in that amount of water. And if you can't fit in that amount of water at once, that doesn't work. But remember, a mikveh can be used for utensils. So if you have just a cover for a pot, this little, thin thing, all you need is that amount of water for it to be a kosher mikveh. A person might not be able to fit in that. For a person, you might have to have more. But we're just talking about the minimum requirement of a mikveh. So it needs to be 40 sa'ah, 100 gallons of rainwater in order for it to be a kosher mikveh. Okay. Now, this idea that it needs to be rainwater is where it gets super complicated. Because according to Halachah, as soon as the water hits a receptacle or is contained within a receptacle, that rainwater, it is no longer considered rainwater. It's now considered regular water. So what that basically means is that in order for us to get the rainwater into the mikvah, so the rain's coming from the sky, we need to get into the mikvah, which is inside the building. We need to somehow get the rainwater into that mikvah without using any sort of utensil. or receptacle, sorry. So we can't have any pipe or any type of thing that's going to carry the water that technically has the capacity to hold water. So a right-angled pipe doesn't work because a right-angled pipe technically can hold water on its own. And therefore, the pipes that we use for a mikveh has to be straight from the gutter in the roof, going down and not slant, never going like this, but rather coming down straight into the mikveh. So you have to kind of plan it.
So you can use a pipe, it just can't be.
Correct. So you have to a pipe, but not a pipe that can be any sort of receptacle. Now it gets super complicated too. A rabbi who's inspecting a mikveh will go up to the roof because, think about it, there's air conditioning, things on roofs. And the air conditioning thing has like a lid, like a rim. And what happens when it rains? It fills up and then spills over, heads down into the gutter, and goes down the thing. And so it turns out that the water that was in that air conditioning kind of rim was held in a receptacle. And then it spilled over and went into your mikveh. Not kosher rainwater. So they'll actually ensure that there's none of these things on the roof of where your mikveh is to make sure there's no issues there. It's going to be a slanted roof going straight into the gutter, down into the mikveh. So you can already tell that this is a complicated process making a mikveh. It's not just about making a hole and just throwing water in there. We need rainwater, 40 sa'ah of rainwater, and somehow it needs to get there without any receptacle.
When I've seen ancient mikvahs around the world, they don't seem to be as complicated.
So the reason why it's probably not so complicated is because they didn't have multiple stories. So, it was just kind of, there probably like an open space where they would open it up, the rain would come through, and that was it. These days where you have, multiple stories or, just the things are higher, so we need to figure out a way for it to get there. So now, here's the thing. Does this mean that the water that a person is going into in the mikveh is rainwater? The answer is no, because we can't rely on always having rainwater in order for us to have a mikveh. Imagine if we had to wait for rain in order to have a mikveh, it would be a disaster, especially in places which don't get a lot of rain. Atlanta gets a fair amount of rain. But think about places like Las Vegas, California. These places could go months without rain. So does that mean you have no mikveh? No. So Halachah provides 3 ways to make regular water gain the status of rainwater. 3 ways. These are the 3 ways. One is called hashaka. Hashaka means literally kissing. How does this work? We build 2 mikvahs almost next to each other or underneath each other. 2 pools, exactly. One pool is just regular water. One pool is this 40 sa'ah of rain. We put a hole in the wall between the 2 things, or in the ground between, if they're on top of each other, and the water touches through the hole. And by the water touching, it creates halachically like the status of rainwater even to the regular water. Since they're connected, they're touching, it gains the status of rainwater.
Because once you have the 40 saw,
yes, exactly.
The rainwater, then
you can't.
You can't.
You never lose that status. Exactly. Okay, that's hashaka. Hashaka means it's touching, it's kissing, and therefore even the regular water gains the status of rainwater. So as long as you have a steady reserve of 40 sa'ah in that one, you can take out the water, replace it, do whatever you want, and you got no problems with the mikveh, whichever one's going into, because it's constantly touching the rainwater. One option, hashaka. Another option called zriya. Zriya means that you have your pool of rainwater, you pour in regular water into the rainwater, and since you have a sufficient amount of rainwater, it never gets overpowered by other water. We never say, well, since you have way more regular water than rainwater, so no longer counts. No, we don't say that. Rather, you pour in regular water, and then you filter that into a different pool. So basically, you have your pool with 40 sa'ah. As long as the regular water goes through that, and then it passes through that, and then the water goes into the next one, we consider it like it was planted. Zriya literally means to be planted. We consider it like it was planted in that pool of rainwater, and then got transferred to the other pool, and now it's rainwater. So hashaka means touching. Zriya means it was put through, so it was dunked in and then transferred. But that original one with the rainwater never loses its status as rainwater because it started out with a solid base of rainwater. The other option is that water, regular water, which runs along the ground without any no pipes, nothing, just runs along the open ground and then flows into a pool, gains the status of rainwater as well. It says it has to be a certain distance, halachically, it has to have a certain amount that it flows along that open floor, ground. But so long as it does, that regular water gains the status of rainwater as well. And that's called hamshach. Okay? So you have these three options of how to make regular water rainwater. Hashaka, Zriya, Hamshacha. Okay? In our mikvahs, we do all of them. We do all of them because since mikvah is so important and it's a major mitzvah, we try to do everything. We try to use all the options available to make sure we're doing everything absolutely right. Now, for those who you might like this one if you like, if this talks to you, that the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Chabad Rebbe, specifically opted for the option of having the two mikvahs on top of each other and not next to each other. So remember, we said as long as there's a hashaka, right? They're just touching each other, it works. So the question is, you could have one pool next to another pool with a hole, and then they just touch, or you could have a pool one on top of the other. So the Rebbe Rashab said, the fifth Chabad Rebbe said specifically that you should choose the option of one on top of the other. That's a better halachic option. Why is that a better halachic option? Because there's a concept which is that when water gets taken out and put back in, taken out and put back in, taken out, put back in, it can reach a certain point that if you've done it too much, so let's say the rainwater, so you have 40 saw of rainwater. So we said once you have 40 saw, you're good. So what happens if I go and put regular water, and then I draw out the rainwater? So let's say I put in 1 gallon of regular water, and I take out a gallon from the rainwater. Put in 1 gallon of regular, take out 1 gallon of. So I do this back and forth and back and forth. Do we say this, forever, that it will always be considered a rainwater pool because it started with 40 saw of rainwater, even though I'm clearly taking out and putting in? Like, how long can we do this for?
But as soon as you
Clear?
pour in, as soon as you pour whatever you pour in, it becomes rainwater.
But the fact is that
it's eventually, right, there's not going to be rain.
Right. The whole idea of why it becomes rainwater is because the base is rainwater. Right. But at a certain point, it stops becoming a base of rainwater. So this is called natal saw v'neisen saw, taking out a saw and putting back in a saw. So taking out rainwater, putting in rainwater. So Halachah says basically that until it's roiv, until it's clearly most of the pool is no longer rainwater, it's okay. But once most of it, it's not rainwater anymore because you took out 20, let's say it was 40 saws. So you took out 20 bucket loads, each one of a saw. So by now, it's possible that you've taken out a majority of rainwater. We no longer consider it a rainwater pool. Make sense?
Okay.
That's what Halachah says. So if that's the situation, so when I have two pools which are touching each other, and people are going to mikveh in one of them, so the water is kind of shaking around. So water is going back and forth like this. And it's possible that this pool with the 40 rainwater, since the water is going back and forth, it's possible that the rainwater one will actually lose its status as rainwater because the water is going back and forth and back and forth. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So how do we solve the problem? By putting them one on top of the other. Why does that help? Because the top one is a nice Heisa mikveh, a nice hot mikveh. The bottom one is cold water. When you have cold and hot, they don't mix. They don't join together. They stay separate. That's just the way that just the way it works. So using kind of the way nature works, it's a neat way of making sure you avoid that problem of losing your status of rainwater in the bottom one, because by having the bottom one cold and the top one hot, you're gonna make sure they're not gonna join together. It's kind of like a neat.
Is there a distance the poles have to be apart to maintain the temperature difference?
I don't know.
I would think that there has to be.
I don't know. Good question. I don't know.
It just has to be separate.
Yeah. Now, since we need rainwater that doesn't go through a receptacle, so sometimes you have an issue that a place doesn't have rain for months and months and months and months.
So how do you
So how do you have a mikvah? How do you maintain that 40 sa'ah? How do you even start it? So the answer is that they bring in snow. They bring in snow from out of state, out of far away. But remember, this is going to be a complicated process, because if you're going to pack in a freezer truck of snow, well, then the freezer truck is a receptacle. So the snow isn't good for a mikveh anymore because the freezer truck is a receptacle. So we need to figure out a way for the snow to get into the truck, but without it being in a receptacle. So first, what you do is you take shovels, which have holes in the bottom of the shovel, meaning they're not solid, they have holes. So it's not a receptacle. Shovel the snow in to milk crates. Milk crates have holes in the bottom, also not receptacles. But snow, you can pack it in, it doesn't fall through. Then, when you put the milk crate onto the truck, it also can't be flush against the bottom of the truck, because then the bottom of the truck is serving as the bottom, and it's holding it up, so it's a receptacle now. So what you do is you put those pallets, and there's space in between, each beam, each wooden plank. And so you put the milk crate on top of the pallet, so it's not flush because there's holes. And therefore, even the milk crate doesn't become a receptacle, and now you're in good shape because you don't have a receptacle. And then once it arrives at its destination, it's again shoveled using a shovel with holes into the mikveh, and now you have rainwater in your mikveh.
Put it directly into the mikveh.
Correct. Ice is the same thing. Ice could work as well. You can bring over chunks of ice from wherever, as long as it's not in a receptacle somehow. You put it in something that has a hole or whatever. That's also going to work to make a mikveh.
Ice like from your refrigerator, or ice from outside?
No, so it can't be from the refrigerator.
So it has to be.
So it has to come from
ice.
wherever you're getting the snow from.
Gotcha.
You go to Antarctica and get yourself some ice. But yeah, from a place that it's just natural ice. And this happens. California had a drought of how long for a while? At some point, years. Yeah, so it had to be figured out. Now, one of the things that gets complicated is having a filter in a mikveh, for a mikveh. And you'll sometimes see when you go to a mikveh, they have something there which says, don't go into the mikveh if the filter is on. Or, look out, there's a light that goes on. If the filter's on, then you know that you shouldn't be going into the mikveh then. So what's the problem with a filter running while you go to the mikveh? So the problem is that the filter is pulling water out of the mikveh, filtering it, and sending it back. So there's a halachah which says, and this is actually a very important issue, that a mikveh can't be a leaky mikveh. Can't have a leaky mikveh. Leaky mikveh is a problem. That's actually why rabbis from time to time come to inspect mikvehs. one of the things that they inspect in a mikveh is to see if the mikveh is leaky, if there's cracks, because that doesn't serve as a proper mikveh if it's leaky. So a mikveh where water is coming out and in through a filter could be regarded as being leaky, because it's not holding its water. The water is coming in and out, in and out. True, it's not coming through a crack, but it's coming through another thing, which makes it go in and out and in and out. And therefore, a filter has the potential to be a problem for a mikveh. And that's why you're not supposed to go into a mikveh when the filter's running. These days, they've gotten smarter, and they actually make the filter inside the water. So it's no longer a leaky mikveh because the filter is in the actual mikveh. So it's not like it's drawing the water outside. The water is right there. It's within, and so that would be fine. But that's a more like modern mikveh technology. If the mikveh is not that way, it would be a problem to have a filter. Now, interestingly, the one time when the rabbis do all these checks, how do they check to see if a mikveh is leaky or not? So they come on Tisha B'Av, because Tisha B'Av, nobody's going to mikveh. So it's the perfect time to check and see if the mikveh is leaky. And what they'll do is they'll come and they'll take a marker and they'll mark the line where the water is up to. And they'll come back 24 hours later at the end of Tisha B'Av and see how much did the water level lower. So of course you have to factor in, what do you call it? Evaporation. So there's going to be some natural, lowering of the water line. But if they see that it really went, it doesn't really make sense how much it went lower, then they know that there's a leak, and they'll bring somebody in to kind of make sure that there's no leaks there. Now, another thing that a mikveh will have, and this costs, a whole bunch of extra money, but it's important, and so people do it anyway, is called an oitzer. An oitzer means a storage. So it's almost like they make a whole new mikveh for what? For storage of rainwater. So that when you get a downpour and you have a lot of rainwater, so they fill up a separate mikveh. It's like its own pool just for rainwater. And this one is not connected to the main one. It's kind of its own little thing, but it's storing rainwater so that when, in case anything happens, in case you run out of rainwater, because imagine it could happen. It could happen that somebody needs to use the mikveh, and you go and inspect it, and it turns out there's not enough rainwater there, and you need to fill it. But where you going to get rainwater? There's no rain falling from the sky, and somebody needs to use the mikveh that night. So what are you going to do? So they keep an oitzer. They keep a separate pool of rainwater so that they can keep it in handy in storage, just in case the need arises to fill in that rainwater pool in case the need arises. So a lot of mikvahs these days are recommended to have an oitzer, to have this third pool where they store rainwater in case the need arises.
That's not receptacle.
Right.
Ground as well.
So it's in the ground as well.
So how do they get the water if it's not connected from there to the next?
So there's like what I believe is that they have a certain like a flap or a whatever that they're able to release, or like open up a flap where the water just gushes through into that other one. So they're connected. Just generally that flap is closed, and then they'll open it and then they'll go through. Yeah.
And swimming pools for you?
Swimming pools, technically, the problem is that, meaning technically, what I mean by that is technically a swimming pool is in the ground, but you don't have any of the other things that make a mikvah kosher in a swimming pool. Meaning to say, we don't have those three options that we said, zriya, hashaka, and hamshacha, which what we mentioned before is that a swimming pool doesn't really have, it's not made from rainwater, right? Swimming pool is just regular water.
It may have rainwater because it's had a downpour.
It may or may not. Right, it may or may not. The thing about a mikveh is that a mikveh needs to have 40 sa'ah of rainwater. Then you can put in other water. But if it starts off with not rainwater, no matter how much rainwater you put in there, it doesn't work. So even a swimming pool that has rainwater coming in, but if the most of it started off not being rainwater, doesn't work. So technically, a swimming pool is in the ground, but all the other factors that make a mikvah don't really work for a mikvah for a swimming pool to be a mikvah. But men will go into a swimming pool for that purpose because, again, it's good. It's in the ground. It has many of the characteristics of a mikvah. It might not be the perfect mikvah the way, for a biblically mandated a mikvah, but it definitely has many of the qualifications.
If a town doesn't have a mikvah, I've read, at least on the conservative, they've used lakes for ritual immersion.
Yeah.
Is that okay on Orthodox also?
Yes, but not all lakes. It depends on the place. It depends on how much rainwater it gets. Like it kind of depends, not as straightforward as that, but yes, it does work.
Well, if it's like Lake Lanier, which is a man-made lake,
Exactly.
that'd be a problem.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying.
It's got to be a natural lake.
Exactly. So it has to be something which it's rainwater and yeah, exactly. So that's what I meant by that. Okay. Now trying to see if I missed anything here. No, I think that is it. So the last point is that that's why, because there's many factors to a mikveh, it's very important that a mikveh gets inspected very often. Because there's these horrible stories where mikveh didn't get inspected for who knows how long, and a rabbi came and looks at it and asks a few basic questions, and it turns out like nobody was making sure that the second mikveh, which was supposed to be full of rainwater, was getting rainwater. Because unless somebody actually knows how these things work, you have no concept to think, or that hole that makes the zriya that connects the two gets stuffed, gets blocked. So now you have no zriya. So what do you have? A pool full of, right? You might as well go to a swimming pool, right? So there's so many things which which can happen, which really need constant supervision, making sure that things are being done well. And that's why, a rabbi who would come to town will meet with a mikvah lady, the person who kind of takes care of the mikvah, making sure that they understand, what's going on and things are being maintained. And really a community. And I think that Chabad here has kind of made it a point that, you bring speakers all the time, but Rabbi Jacobson's coming this week, right? And they make it a point to really, when they have these rabbis coming through town, just take a look at the mikveh. Just, see that everything looks okay. Because you could have somebody coming from the outside, or they'll step in and they'll notice something that even somebody who's been around for, regularly doesn't see, just because they're used to it or whatever. So it's always good to have a fresh set of eyes. And so definitely over here, I know that my father was here a couple of years ago, and he went around to, all the different mikvahs, and just throughout, I know that they make a point to ask rabbis who come by to check, and that's good. Always good to have a fresh set of eyes on it. So the takeaway is this is one of the mitzvot, one of the things that the Rebbe launched in 1975, part of the Rebbe's campaign to really add in these important mitzvahs to strengthen the Jewish home, and it's an important part of us and our Jewish identity. So that's that.
Sure. What about going to mikveh before wedding?
Yeah. So it's really the same idea that the concept is that a nida, a woman who's experienced the period, when following like a certain procedure, goes to mikveh. So really, it doesn't matter if the person is married or not married. So a woman who's about to get married, before she has a relationship with her husband, so would need to go through that process. And before she gets married, so she's not in any relationships, it doesn't really matter. But now that she's getting into a relationship, so you need to go to mikveh. That's where it comes from.
Yeah, I got another question.
Sure.
So you said it's not required for the man to go to the mikveh, but
It's not biblically mandated. I mean to say, the Torah does talk about cases where a man does have to go to mikveh, but those cases don't apply today because those things are more relevant to temple-related things. Today, where we don't have any of those things, a man doesn't need to be pure for those purposes. So you don't biblically have to go to mikveh. It's more of a rabbinic thing these days.
When my daughter was married 4 years ago, the officiant was a Chabad rabbi in Austin, and he dictated that my son-in-law go to the mikveh before the wedding.
Yeah, so that's just because, like I said, going to mikveh it makes a person in a more pure state. And before you get married, which is a big day, right? The day of your wedding is like Yom Kippur. You fast. It's a big day, so it's appropriate to go to the mikveh and go through that process. But it's not it's not for the same reasons as maybe a woman would.
Thank you.
Yeah,
It's the Rabbi mandates it, as opposed to Rabbi
Suggested.
recommended.
exactly. Yeah, it's all in the terminology. Has Rabbi